Just taking a look at, obviously, where we start, which is typically with the running backs. Jonathan Taylor, Christian McCaffrey going to be the first two guys based on average draft position. But is that the way the tiers go? As we take a look at Heath's tiers, first tier, starting with tier number 1, McCaffrey, Taylor, Eckler, Henry. So, Heath, you're going with McCaffrey over Taylor. A little bit of a change from what we typically see, but you've made the move this week. Tier 2, Tier 3, we'll get into some of these guys as we take a look at Dave's tiers as well to show you a little bit of a difference. Dave has 85 running backs in his first tier, all the way down from Jonathan Taylor through Alvin Kamara.
Barry
tier
Sanders
2,
still there.
Tier 3. Yeah, hey, if you could draft Barry Sanders in those retro leagues, not a bad way to go. But let's talk about some of these tiers here. So we'll start with tier 1. And so for Heath, again, you have 4 in your first tier, 5 guys in your second tier, those guys being Mixon, Cook, Kamara, and Najee. And Dave, as you see here on the graphic, has 8 guys in tier 1. So what's the difference for both of you just in terms of how you go about putting guys in your first tier? What's the barometer for how you put these tiers together?
These are the running backs that I believe have the best chance to finish top 5, if not top 3 at the position, and they're ranked in the order of the likelihood, in my opinion, of how they could do that. So Jonathan Taylor, elite prospect, great situation, feels like a safe player to have in fantasy. He's at the top of the list. Derrick Henry, amazing track record over the last 3 years. Top 4 or better in PPR points per game in each of those seasons. I think he's in a great situation still, so he's next best, and so on down the line.
Yeah, and mine's more based on projections and the difference between the projections for the players. There's about the same difference between Christian McCaffrey and Derrick Henry as there is between Henry and Joe Mixon in 4 and 5 at running backs. There's a 30-point drop-off there between Henry and Mixon, and so that's why I only have 4 in the top tier.
But in terms of just, the theory, is it these 4 guys for you and the 8 guys for you in terms of these guys could be number 1? All 4 of these guys could be number 1?
I don't really think anybody outside of tier 1 could be number 1 without a lot of help from the guys who are in tier 1.
Agree.
But for you, it's 8 guys. For you, it's only 4.
Yes.
Okay, so you think 8 guys could potentially be the number 1 running back this year. So we don't always see all 8 of those guys go in the first round. We certainly see the first 4 guys go in the first round. And the biggest question I think a lot of people are going to start to ask themselves as the draft starts to unfold, who should be number 1? So for you, it's Christian McCaffrey. For you, it's Jonathan Taylor. Dave, you're not as excited about McCaffrey clearly as a lot of people, even based on average draft position where he's going second overall. So I have to ask this question. We know why he's not number 1. It's injury related. Take injury out of the equation. Why is he not number 1?
It's really hard to make the argument for him not being number 1, because one of the arguments that I used to make is because I was worried that his workload could be limited because his coaches know that they need him to survive, and if he's not playing 80% of the snaps each week, then he's got a great chance to make it through the season. But even over the course of his career, outside of his rookie year, when he's played between 50, 75% of the snaps, he's still gotten you at least 22 PPR points every single time. So he doesn't need to play 80% of the snaps to be a stud for fantasy football. I think that's what we might end up seeing. I'm worried that he's not going to play more than 10, 11 games this season. I think 11 is the cutoff. If he does play 11, you're going to feel good about taking him in round 1. 10 or fewer, you might second guess it depending on how the other running backs do. Taylor, Henry, Eckler, etc.
And 10 games is all he's played the last 2 seasons, as you see here. And, the numbers are clearly glaring. But 2019, best running back in fantasy, historical season. 2020, based on a per-game basis, even though it was only 3 games, basically the same numbers, 29 plus PPR points per game. And then last year, the 5 healthy games that he played, 4 of those, 24 or more PPR points. So he would have been the best running back in fantasy, and I know that's what you're looking at.
And even going back to 2018, when he only had 219 carries, he was still more than 10% better than what Jonathan Taylor was last year. I've really pulled back on Christian McCaffrey's projection. I'm only projecting him for something like 19 touches a game, and compared to what he was doing in 2019, that's not very many. But still, he projects for more points for Jonathan Taylor. I just think, I can understand if you don't want to draft running backs in the first round because they're injury prone, and so you want to take wide receivers, you want to go 0 wide receiver and just play it safe with wide receivers. If you're going to draft a bunch of running backs early, why not draft the best running back first?
Because you're worried about him getting hurt. Because
if you're worried about running backs getting hurt, then you should draft wide receivers.
This guy's a lot different than plenty of the other running backs.
Dalvin Cook has missed more games in his career than Christian McCaffrey.
Christian McCaffrey has had 5 separate injuries in the last 2 years, and this is what does it for me. This is why I can't put him in my top 2, is because he's had 5 different injuries the last 2 seasons, 4 of them lower body, ankle, knee, hamstring, etc.
One of those
like
ankle
that.
injuries, though, he wanted to still play through it, and they said, we're shutting you down.
And every time he's had one of those injuries, the Panthers gave a timetable, and he went longer than the timetable. So I'm worried that if he gets hurt again, they'll say he's out for 3 games, and people who draft him say, okay, I can live with 3 games without Christian McCaffrey, and it'll turn into 6, something like that. That's the reason why I can't commit that early round pick to him.
And I think, it's been fun to watch his average draft position climb because it started around 5'6", and it's climbed up to 2. It would not be shocking to see him go to number 1. For me, it's really age. I like the fact that Taylor's in the sweet spot of what the age has typically been, 23, 24. When we see these guys get to number 1, he's 23 years old. Offensive line, I still think favors the Colts, even though the Panthers' offensive line is certainly improving. Quarterback certainly favors still the Colts, even though, again, Panthers' situation is improving. I may switch it myself because McCaffrey's ceiling, there is no ceiling in comparison. So Taylor could be amazing, but it's not bad to take him at number 2. You could take McCaffrey number 1 and have a great player. All right, let's talk about some of these other guys in Tier 2 and Tier 3. So if you want to throw the tiers back up, we can start with Dave's or Heath's, however you want to do it. But Dave's a little bit lower on Aaron Jones than Heath is. And, so for Heath here, you got Aaron Jones, essentially what would be your 6th running back off the board by your ranking. So even ahead of Dalvin Cook, Kamara, and Najee Harris, and they're a little bit down on Harris. But Aaron Jones in a really good spot this year. Dave, you're a little bit lower on Aaron Jones than Heath is. I don't believe he's in your 2nd tier. I believe he's in your 3rd tier. Or no, he's in your 2nd tier. I forgot. Your 1st tier is
right.
What's the concern about Aaron Jones? And then Heath, just highlight the expectations for him.
It's that he's going to share with A.J. Dillon, and I like A.J. Dillon a lot. I like Aaron Jones too, and you look at this Packers offense and you look at their receivers and you go, boy, this could be a team that runs the ball a lot, and they've got 2 really talented running backs. Last year, there were 6 games where they were both playing together. This is after Jones' knee injury. This isn't at the beginning of the season when A.J. Dillon really wasn't in the flow of the offense yet, and it includes a playoff game. Jones was averaging 15 PPR points per game. He was getting 10 carries per game, 4.7 targets per game. A.J. Dillon was right behind him, though. 12.3 PPR points per game, 2 targets per game, and he was actually out-carrying Aaron Jones. 12 carries per game for Dillon. I think that flips. I think Jones will have more carries and obviously more targets than A.J. Dillon, but I think both of them are going to get a lot of work, and I think it caps the upside for Aaron Jones.
I do agree they're both going to get a lot of work. I just think they don't have hardly anybody else to give the ball to, and so we're going to see Aaron Jones lead this team in receptions, in targets, and maybe even in receiving yards. I just think he's probably their best pass catcher right now, and he's never really been a true feature back. He's shared with Jamal Williams. He's shared with A.J. Dillon. 10 carries a game, 12 carries a game, that might be about right. I view him a lot like what we've seen when we've seen the best of Alvin Kamara.
I'm excited about Aaron Jones. I do think they can coexist. It's going to be fun to see how they, end up splitting the touches. But you're right, Heath. It would not be a surprise if he leads the team in receptions. I mean, Allen Lazard has plenty of opportunity, but he's just never been that guy. Christian Watson can't get on the field. Romeo Doubs is still a rookie. Sammy Watkins can't stay healthy. I mean, you can make excuses across the board. Aaron Jones, whenever Devontae Adams has not been there, has been a special talent. Let's talk about Deandre Swift, and certainly he's in a great spot. We know this offensive line is going to be really good. Jared Goff, year 2, should be a little bit better. Hard Knocks was fun to start. I think a lot of people are going to get behind the Lions, and Swift should be the guy. Now, clearly they have other bodies there. Jamal Williams, Justin Jackson, we'll see what they do with some of the other reserves that they used last year. But Swift could really take a step forward this year as a pass catcher and certainly as a rusher as well. What's the concern, Heath? I'll start with you.
The current concern is what happened when they took play calling responsibilities away from Anthony Lynn. I loved DeAndre Swift going into last year because Anthony Lynn generates running back touches like no other offensive coordinator. When Dan Campbell took the reins away from him, we saw the running back target rate drop quite a bit. It's also when we saw Amon-Ra St. Brown take off. Now they've got a new offensive coordinator. They went out and added a lot at wide receiver. That tells me that they want to throw the ball to their wide receivers a little more. I don't think Swift sees quite the target volume he saw early in the year. He might have more success running the ball. He'll need to because last year, in terms of a lot of efficiency metrics, he wasn't as good running as Jamal Williams was.
I think he could take a step forward in those efficiency metrics, and I don't believe that he's going to take a step back in target share. I think that's his game. I think he's an airback, and I think the Lions know it, and they're going to put him in position to catch as many as 5 passes per game. I'm banking on that. I think the Lions also know that they can't lean too heavily on him, so there will be a second back involved, just like there will be in pretty much every backfield across the league. But those first 7 games last year, Jamie, he was averaging 18.7 PPR points per game. That's top 5 stuff. That's something that I'm excited about and why he's a top 10 PPR running back for me.
I think the difference comes down to you like Swift over Jones, you like Jones over Swift, right. And we see Swift ADP-wise certainly ahead of Aaron Jones right now. Again, we'll see what happens when a lot of the redraft leagues start to happen. Rounds 3, 4, 5, you could sort of dissect it however you want to. This is where we start to talk about the dead zone. Heath, just give me a quick synopsis of what the dead zone means for fantasy managers not familiar with that phrase when drafting running
And this was introduced to me by Ben Gretsch a couple of years ago, back when he
Our
was
former
with us.
colleague,
Yes, yeah, former colleague. It's basically the point when you get to either late round 3, early round 4, and it's a combination of the fact that ADP is smart enough to project which running backs are going to be reliable, and the guys that get taken in the 4 through 6 range are the guys that maybe have the volume, but that's the only reason we're drafting them. Now, I think this year looks a lot different because in the past, those guys have been, now Ezekiel Elliott would fit in, the guys who were maybe towards the end of their
Montgomery could
career.
fit in.
Right. Well, he's still
Not
just 25.
yes,
Yes,
but just a guy that's getting a lot of touches.
Yes,
volume.
touches, but nothing else. It's the guys who maybe are, they're going to have a ton of carries in between the 20s, but they don't catch a lot of
Jacobs,
passes.
Gibson, those type of guys.
And so what Gretsch had said even in the past was, if you're going to draft a back in that range, make it a young guy who's going to catch passes. We've got a lot of those in that range this year.
That's
Yes.
why I think the dead zone moves back this year. I don't think you can classify it as rounds 3, 4, 5 this year. I think it's around 6, 7.
Sure, but I think the people that will push back on that will say James Conner could be a compiler, Montgomery could be a compiler. Ezekiel, I'm talking ADP, not necessarily our rankings. Elliott could be a compiler, Montgomery could be a compiler, and then you factor in what's going to happen with Javonte Williams and the touches with Melvin Gordon, but he falls in line, I think, with more what you're talking about, though, about a younger guy. So this is tiers 1, 2, and 3. I want to kind of show tier 3 and tier 4. This is, tier 3 and tier 4 for Dave, tier 4 for Heath, because it kind of feels like this is where we're trending in terms of where the dead zone is. So you see a couple guys that may not necessarily fall into this category, but it's really more of those running backs that we're talking about. So when we get to tier 3 and 4 for you, Dave, and tier 4 for you, Heath, your favorite guy from this group maybe to not necessarily be a dead zone victim.
This guy is the opposite of a dead zone victim. It's Travis Etienne. He's young. He's a big-time pass catcher. He's explosive. He's going to be implemented in the Jacksonville offense. And we talked about the Packers as a team that's got question marks at wide receiver. Here's a team that's got question marks as far as pure running back goes, rushing goes. We don't know what James Robinson's going to end up being. I'm optimistic. I love the ADP on Robinson, but we don't know how good he's going to be. Etienne could end up leading this team in targets, catches, yards, and he's explosive. He can have a lot of breakaway runs. 3 running backs last year finished top 12 in total PPR points. It's not per game. Total points without 200 carries. Etienne has that kind of upside.